Under the shade of a sprawling tree, a young red-haired noblewoman named Melfi enjoyed a peaceful afternoon, savoring a sandwich with evident delight. An older nobleman approached, intrigued by the aroma of her meal. Unable to resist, he requested a taste. With a gentle smile, Melfi opened her basket, offering him a selection of her creations. The man chose one resembling hers and took a bite, immediately enchanted by its perfect seasoning and rich umami flavor. However, when he asked what kind of meat it contained, Melfi calmly answered that it was backhorn, a monster notorious for its deadly poison. The revelation made the nobleman stagger back and vomit against a nearby tree, horrified that he had eaten such a creature. While he fled in disgust, Melfi continued eating, unbothered. To her, monster meat was a challenge and a passion. With the right preparation, even the most dangerous beasts could be turned into delicacies. Though others found her obsession disturbing, she believed someone someday would understand. Days later, she attended a grand banquet in Praven Park, hosted by King Milady to celebrate the autumn harvest. The event gathered nobles from across the kingdom, serving as an opportunity to showcase culinary achievements and, more importantly, for young aristocrats to seek suitable partners. Melfi, the daughter of a count, was among them, though her purpose there was far from voluntary. Her stepmother had warned her that if she failed to find a fiancé within the year, she would be sent to a convent. Even her father, worn down by worry, agreed to accept any decent suitor. Despite her family's pressure, Melfi found no joy in the event. Her peers whispered behind their fans, calling her unapproachable despite her beauty. Tired of their judgmental gazes, she quietly slipped away from the crowd and wandered toward the area where knights gathered. Perhaps she thought she could meet someone who didn't already know of her strange reputation. Her solitude was soon broken by a terrified scream. A monstrous creature had appeared, a backhorn identical to the kind she once cooked. Panic swept through the park as nobles fled in every direction. Amid the chaos, Melfi noticed an elderly couple struggling to escape. The man's cane had snapped, leaving him unable to move. Without hesitation, she rushed to help them. But before they could flee, the backhorn reared up behind her, its venomous fangs glistening. Fear surged through her as she realized her mistake. She had failed to find a fiancé, and now she might die trying to save strangers. Yet before the creature could strike, a silver-haired man appeared in a flash, cutting through the beast with a single precise swing. The monster fell lifeless at his feet. The man was Reijou, the infamous blood-mad Duke, known for his unrelenting thirst for battle and rumored insanity. His cold demeanor and crimson-stained blades struck fear in everyone who saw him. Yet to Melfi, his composure and strength were mesmerizing. As the guards secured the area, Reijou turned his gaze toward her. Melfi, covered in dirt and blood, noticed traces of blackened monster ichor near his mouth. Concerned, she stepped forward and insisted that backhorn blood was dangerously toxic when swallowed. Reijou studied her curiously as she explained the nature of monster corruption, how the blood of maddened beasts was tainted with magic toxins, while the flesh of calmer creatures could be rendered harmless through careful preparation. Her words flowed with confidence, her knowledge revealing years of strange culinary experimentation. Intrigued, Reijou offered her purified water to cleanse any lingering toxins and ordered his men to prepare clean clothes for her. When Melfi mentioned she had butchered a beast just a week earlier, his composure momentarily broke. Her calm admission confirmed what he had heard. She was the eccentric noblewoman rumored to feast on monsters known throughout the kingdom as the voracious villainess. In this world, monsters were more than beasts. They were magical entities infused with unstable energy. Their flesh was feared because consuming it could bring illness, madness, or death. Most people disposed of monster carcasses immediately after slaying them. But Melfi was different. Her fascination with food drove her to challenge those taboos, perfecting techniques to bleed out toxins and transform forbidden meat into exquisite cuisine. Reijou, rather than recoiling, seemed captivated by her unusual hobby. As they walked together away from the chaos, he asked about the flavor and texture of such meats. Melfi described backhorn flesh as rich and hearty, akin to wild beef, yet requiring precise tenderization to soften its fibers. When properly prepared, it could be roasted or stewed into something divine. Reijou listened intently, piecing together her method and realizing the truth behind the rumors. She was not a villainess at all, but an innovator unafraid of the unknown. For the first time, Melfi found someone who listened without judgment. Her passion, often met with mockery, was now received with genuine curiosity. Reijou even asked her to prepare a meal for him one day. The unexpected request made her heart stir in a way she had never felt before. Later, at the house of Galbraith Pavilion, Reijou arranged for her to rest while the servant, Costelaforgue, fetched a change of clothes borrowed from the royal wardrobe. As she waited, Reijou washed away the remnants of battle nearby, his well-built frame illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Melfi, though accustomed to seeing hunters clean themselves after fights, found herself quietly captivated by his presence. Despite her protests, Roger insisted she use the water first. Their actions mirrored one another, each showing care, each uncertain how to express it. When she asked about the possibility of learning to fight monsters herself, Roger dismissed the idea gently, suggesting she leave the dangers of battle to him. Instead, he promised to bring her whatever rare beasts she desired to cook. The air between them grew warmer as they shared the quiet space. Yet their moment was interrupted when Kos returned, horrified to find his master half-dressed before an unmarried woman. He scolded Roger for his lack of propriety, prompting the Duke to laugh lightly before turning away. Melfi soon emerged wearing a fresh floral gown, its fine embroidery reflecting her elegance. Roger's men stared in disbelief when she praised him for slaying the monster. Most ladies would have fainted at such a sight, but she only admired him more. As dusk settled, Roger presented the severed monster head to her, expecting disgust. Instead, she examined it with fascination, noting the clean precision of his blade. The soldiers exchanged amused glances, quietly acknowledging that the two might be perfectly matched in their peculiarities. Before parting, Roger promised to bring her a royal moodle, a rare beast known for its delicate marbled flesh, the next time they met. The mere thought made her stomach flutter with anticipation. She reminded him that the creature's flavor would improve if captured alive, a challenge he accepted with an approving smile. Despite his fearsome reputation, Melfi now saw the truth. Roger was not a monster, but a man burdened by false rumors, much like herself. As she prepared to depart, Melfi offered him a small basket filled with jerky made from skitspit, a beast native to her family's lands. Roger accepted immediately and took a bite, savoring the savory umami that spread across his tongue. His loyal servant panicked, fearing poison, and demanded that the Duke spit it out. Amused, Roger instead shared the jerky with him. Kos reluctantly tasted it and was astonished by its depth of flavor, declaring it delicious. For Melfi, this was a moment she had never experienced before. All her life, people had recoiled from her creations, calling her cursed, unladylike, or insane. Yet now, a feared Duke and his servant were praising her cooking without hesitation. As her carriage pulled away, she hid her tears behind the window curtain. Roger waved as the carriage rolled down the dirt road, his expression softening. To him, she was no villainess, only a woman misunderstood by her peers, much like himself. Though she assumed he was merely being polite, he found himself looking forward to their next encounter. That evening, the moonlight reflected across the fallen Backhorn's remains, marking the beginning of an unlikely bond between two outcasts, a blood-soaked duke and a monster-eating noblewoman, who, through their shared eccentricities, discovered a strange and gentle connection. By the time Melphiera Marchalrayd returned to her family's territory, winter had already taken hold. At the estate gates, her father awaited her, something that rarely happened. He rushed forward as her carriage stopped, the cold air mixing with his breath as he asked what on earth she had done. Melphiera was confused, still adjusting from the journey, but before she could speak, he reminded her of her position as a lady of the Marchalrayd family and of what was expected of her. The question of why the Duke of Galbraith had sent a proposal for her hand was beyond his comprehension. Melphiera, startled, misunderstood at first, thinking the Duke sought her literal hands for some strange task, but realization soon struck. Her father explained that the Duke of Galbraith himself had formally asked for her hand in marriage, leaving him baffled and unsure how to respond. Melphiera felt her heart pound as the cold seeped into her skin, realizing how serious this was. Elsewhere, Aristide Roger du Galbraith reported to Crown Prince Maxim du Liverstole Merdlandias about the recent hunt. The Duke had handled a monster den filled with toxic beasts and fulfilled his duties without a single casualty. Maxim, ever casual despite his royal demeanor, reminded Aristide that he preferred being called Brother Maxim, as they once did in childhood. Aristide refused the familiarity, keeping a clear boundary between royal family and subject, even though they shared blood. Maxim, amused, turned his attention to the basket Aristide held. Though Aristide dismissed it as nothing, Maxim's keen curiosity revealed it contained scatspit jerky, a rare delicacy made from small monsters. Tasting it, he praised the flavor and teased his younger brother, knowing it was made by the infamous voracious villainess. Aristide corrected him, giving her full name, Melphiera Marchalrayd. The Crown Prince found the situation intriguing, playfully suggesting that the usually stoic Duke might have found someone who could stir his heart. Aristide left the tent, refusing to engage, but his brother's words lingered. As he rode through the woods, Aristide reflected on the fiery-haired woman who had faced danger without fear. He remembered her courage and the spark in her eyes as she confronted the monster, unflinching even as its blood stained her dress. There was something extraordinary about her. How such a bold spirit existed within such a delicate frame. It had been a long time since anyone left such an impression on him. His subordinate, Kostela Ford, later reported that they had secured the Backhorn's habitat and that hunting had been suspended by royal decree. Aristide ordered that all hunts remain halted, not wanting more unnecessary killing. Kos, quick with words, teased the Duke about whether Lady Melphiera would attend their future banquets. Aristide, suspecting Kos of telling Maxim about their encounter, received only a sleek grin in response. Alone again, he thought of Melphiera's tears from that day, vowing never to let her wear that expression again. Back in the Marchalrayd estate, Melphiera was still trying to process everything. Her father mentioned that the Duke's letter had arrived a week prior, delivered on the back of a blazing eagle adorned with the Galbraith crest. The extravagant gesture left her both impressed and jealous, wishing she could have seen the magnificent creature herself. When questioned about the banquet, her explanation remained unchanged. The Duke had saved her from a magic beast. Yet, the content of his letter was even more surprising. The Duke of Galbraith expressed gratitude for their time together and formally requested her hand in marriage. The Marchalrayd family could not reject a noble of such standing without reason, though both father and daughter suspected the proposal might hide other motives. Later that night, Melphiera pondered the meaning behind the proposal. They had only met once at the banquet, bonding not over courtly matters, but over a shared curiosity for monster cuisine. It suddenly dawned on her that the Duke, a man of prestige and solitude, had no one who shared his fascination with such things. She could understand that loneliness, how thrilling passions felt meaningless when unshared. Wanting to bridge that isolation, she decided she would treat his letter as a gesture of mutual understanding rather than politics. As she thought so, the jeweled letter case began to glow and a magical message unfolded. Aristide's recorded voice explained how dull the banquet felt after she left and how his subordinate Kos had eaten the jerky she made, much to his regret. He ended the message by saying he would visit her before the end of winter, on the 18th day of Sirius, which was tomorrow. Melphiera's heart raced. It was no wonder her father had been so flustered. The Duke was coming to visit in person. Lying in bed that night, Melphiera held a framed portrait of her late mother. Her mother had once dreamed of enriching the harsh lands they ruled, researching ways to make monster meat edible and sustainable for the people. Melphiera had inherited that dream. She would prove to the world that even monsters could bring nourishment if treated properly. Her next step was clear: to perfect her culinary research and make her mother's vision a reality. Still, her thoughts drifted back to the Duke's words, and her pulse quickened with anticipation. The following morning, Melphiera's stepmother, Countess Celia, stormed into her room, scolding her for not being ready to greet their noble guest. Melphiera hesitated, uncertain how to explain that she had only just awoken. The air trembled moments later with a deafening roar outside. Melphiera rushed to the window, her breath catching at the sight of a formation of glacial dragons circling above the estate. At their head rode Aristide Reijou du Galbraith, the Duke himself, descending with the grandeur befitting his title. As he approached her window, he announced his purpose: to claim her hand and to deliver the gift he had promised. Melphiera directed him to land the dragons in the northern pasture while she composed herself. The image of the Duke astride the dragon lingered in her mind, his poise, his command of the magnificent beasts. She had never seen glacial dragons before, creatures so unlike the dragonlings native to her homeland. Her stepmother, still reeling from the spectacle, demanded to know what was happening. Upon learning of the Duke's arrival, Celia grew furious, calling him the blood-mad Duke and accusing him of arrogance for riding dragons into their lands. Melphiera, however, calmly announced her decision. She intended to accept the Duke's proposal with pleasure. Outside, Melphiera met Aristide for the first time since the banquet. Despite the biting cold, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. She explained she had just returned from the capital and had little time to prepare. Aristide's aide, Kos, apologized for the unannounced visit, admitting the Duke had been too eager to wait. Aristide examined Melphiera's hair, noting its fluffy texture, though she considered it untamable. When he asked where to deliver his gift, she led him toward the pasture. To her astonishment, he revealed a massive bag that seemed to move. Peering inside, she froze in awe. Before her was a royal moodle, a rare golden-furred variant of a species usually white, bearing twin spiral horns and a sharp central one. Such beasts were prized for their pelts, but their meat was often discarded. The sight of one alive offered as a gift nearly brought her to tears. Aristide placed her hand over the creature's chest, letting her feel its heartbeat. It was only sleeping, subdued by magic. The realization overwhelmed her with gratitude. She imagined the ways she could prepare it: grilled, stewed, or roasted. Every part could contribute to her research. Moments later, Melphiera's father arrived to greet the Duke properly. In the excitement, she nearly forgot the true reason for his visit: the marriage proposal. When she requested permission for the dragons to hunt in the Bartos Mountains, her father agreed but wondered whether the moodle was food for them. The Duke clarified that it was a gift from Melphiera. Her father, astonished, realized the Duke already understood his daughter's unique interests. She requested that the research facility, her late mother's laboratory, be reopened for demonstration. Aristide supported her immediately, declaring that he understood her dedication despite the unflattering rumors surrounding her. His commitment remained firm. When her father learned that the Moodle was still alive, he was even more surprised. The Duke expressed his wish to see how the creature would be prepared, and permission was granted. Riding the glacial dragon together, Melphiera guided Aristide to the research facility. The wind whipped through her crimson hair, and the dragon's wings shimmered under the pale winter sun. She found the creature's low rumbling surprisingly endearing, and her earlier nervousness began to fade. Approaching the building her mother had once filled with life and ambition, she felt a mix of excitement and dread. The future of her research, and perhaps her heart, now rested on how the Duke would perceive it. She wanted him to see her world for what it was, not just the product of scandalous rumors, but a legacy of innovation and compassion. Upon arriving at the lab, Reijou noticed an ancient magic circle carved into the floor. Intrigued, he asked Melfi about it. She explained that it had once been her mother's creation, a design she later improved. It was what she used to process monster meat. Reijou found the idea ingenious, but couldn't help wondering how she managed to drain all the magic from a monster's corpse using only that circle. Melfi clarified that another tool was involved. She stepped into the storage shed and returned with a quartz flask. It looked ordinary, but she explained that it could draw out both the beast's mana and blood at once. Once activated and infused with her magic, it would become brilliantly colored. Reijou admired her craftsmanship, but before he could ask more, Melfi made a peculiar request. She wanted to see Reijou's sword behead a monster again. Before long, Melfi began preparing for the extraction. Cleaning such a massive creature alone would take hours, so she asked for Reijou's help. With a wave of his hand, his knights got to work. They were used to harvesting valuable materials from monsters and quickly stripped away what was needed. Within minutes, the golden-furred beast lay ready for her ritual. Reijou removed his jacket and asked if she was prepared. Melfi quietly prayed for the creature, promising not to waste any of its meat. Then she activated the circle and gave him the signal. Reijou lifted his sword and, with a single motion, severed the beast's head. His swing was so swift that Melfi could barely follow it. With the creature slain, Melfi began extracting its blood and magic. Holding the flask, she chanted softly, and the blood started flowing into it. But this was her first time handling a beast of such size, and the amount of mana-infused blood far exceeded her expectations. The flask began to crack as it filled beyond capacity. Melfi panicked. Once the spell had begun, she couldn't stop it. Reijou reacted instantly. After she handed in a replacement, he swapped the flasks in one smooth motion. Thanks to his quick thinking, the spell was completed safely, and the creature was fully drained. Reijou sighed in relief. Despite losing its blood, the monster's body looked almost unchanged. Melfi explained that her spell only extracted blood, leaving the rest of the body's moisture intact to preserve flavor. Reijou was impressed once again and asked how such a method had come to exist. 17 years ago, Melfi explained, the region had suffered a terrible famine. Hundreds died as crops withered and the land lost fertility. Her mother, desperate to save their people, began researching how to make monsters edible. The process was complex, but it worked. She had turned what was once feared into a source of life. After her passing, Melfi continued her research, hoping to simplify it so anyone could use it. It was both her inheritance and her passion. She smiled faintly, admitting that she also enjoyed tasting rare monsters herself. Reijou admired her resolve, but one question remained. Holding the flask of shimmering blood, he asked what she used it for. Melfi explained that it served as a power source, fuel for fires and lamps that lasted for months. Reijou was stunned. Without realizing it, Melfi had achieved something royal mages had failed to do for generations. She had found a way to extract and store pure magical essence in liquid form. In the wrong hands, such a discovery could be catastrophic. When he voiced his concern, Melfi looked uneasy. Reijou reassured her that he trusted her completely. Then, with a grin, he teased that he was relieved the rumors about her drinking monster blood weren't true. Her shimmering hair had nearly convinced him she might be a vampire. Melfi flushed at the unexpected compliment, and in her flustered state, blurted out how dazzling Reijou had looked earlier when he rode in on his dragon. Realizing what she'd said, both fell silent, the air between them thick with embarrassment. The awkwardness lasted until chaos interrupted, reminding them they still had work to do. They quickly parted and returned to their duties. Later, Melfi approached with a hunting permit. Reijou's dragon had devoured the beast's organs but still wasn't satisfied, so they needed to hunt again. As she spoke, Reijou's stomach growled audibly. Seeing this, Melfi smiled and suggested they cook a few pieces of meat right away. Reijou agreed and pulled out a small pouch, the slice mill, a blend of spices he'd taken from his head chef before leaving. He let Melfi taste a pinch, and her eyes lit up at its complex aroma. Together, they prepared 2 skewers and waited for them to cook, the smell quickly filling the air. Before they could take a bite, Chaos appeared out of nowhere, demanding to know what they were doing. Reijou tried to hide the food, but the scent gave them away. Thinking fast, he handed Chaos the permit and told him to hunt more monsters. Chaos, however, refused to leave without Reijou, insisting that their best fighter couldn't sit around grilling meat while everyone else worked. Reijou tried to defend himself, saying he was helping Melfi, but Chaos only smirked and accused him of sneaking a meal while his men went hungry. With no way out, Reijou promised to make Chaos a skewer too, but then realized the entire squad had gathered, staring at him expectantly. Resigned, he sighed and began grilling enough for everyone. When the first skewer was done, Chaos declared that, as commander, he needed to test it for poison. He took a large bite and froze. The flavor was astonishing. The meat melted in his mouth, rich and tender beyond belief. The others stared at him hungrily. Reijou demanded to know if it was safe, but Chaos mischievously replied that magical poisoning sometimes took hours to appear. The soldiers groaned. Melfi finally intervened, assuring them that if anyone fell ill, she would personally prepare the medicine. That was all they needed to hear. The knights eagerly grabbed their skewers. The taste was divine, juicy, perfectly seasoned, unlike anything they had ever eaten. Melfi beamed with pride, calling it the best monster meat she had ever prepared. Reijou praised her talent, saying no one else could have achieved such perfection. She tried to credit her mother's research, but Reijou insisted it was her skill that had brought it to life. His knights agreed, loudly declaring her a genius. As everyone feasted, Reijou reached for a third skewer, but Melfi called his name. Thinking she was about to scold him for overeating, he quickly assured her he would still have room for dinner. Instead, she quietly asked him to follow her. Inside the lab, the atmosphere shifted. Melfi led him into a cluttered room filled with papers and strange devices. She apologized for the mess, but Reijou smiled, saying all labs look that way. While examining the equipment, he noticed a set of metallic spikes shaped like scarabs. Melfi explained that they were traps she designed to capture monsters for study. Reijou was impressed. He had wondered how she obtained her test subjects. She said the local knights sometimes helped her, but often she had to hunt alone. That revelation startled him. He asked if the townsfolk disapproved of her work. Melfi hesitated, then nodded. People despised the idea of eating monster meat. Even those her mother had once saved denied the truth, refusing to believe they had ever eaten such food. To them, it was a taboo better forgotten. Reijou could sense the quiet ache behind Melfi's calm tone, a kind of sorrow that didn't show on her face but lived within her voice. Despite the ridicule and condemnation surrounding her work, she continued forward with unshakable conviction. Melfi had inherited not only her mother's knowledge, but also her resolve to keep that legacy alive no matter how much the world chose to forget. As Reijou listened, memories of that same famine resurfaced. It was during those dark days that he had lost everything, only to be adopted later by the Galbraith family. The coincidence struck him deeply. Their lives, shaped by the same tragedy, now stood at a crossroads of fate. He stepped closer, guiding Melfi to sit beside him on the worn sofa as the faint hum of mana from the surrounding runes filled the silence. His purpose in coming here wasn't to dissect her theories or claim her discoveries. He had come for something far more personal. Reijou no longer sought to understand her research, he wanted to understand her. For the first time, Melfi felt truly seen. Beneath his steady gaze, there was no trace of judgment or obligation, only genuine intent. In that still moment, she realized Reijou did not look at her as a scholar burdened by her past, but as someone worth standing beside, someone worth believing in. Reijou then asked Mel what she thought of him as a partner. The question lingered with her long after their conversation ended. Until that moment, she had never truly considered the idea, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that marriage to him might not be impossible. Her father had already agreed to her engagement with a knight, so a union with a duke would hardly face objection. The thought of spending her days beside Reijou stirred something unfamiliar in her, a quiet excitement that made her heart race. Even as she entertained the thought, insecurity followed. She could not imagine standing beside a man of such stature without appearing small and unworthy. Yet, despite her doubts, the offer was too generous to ignore. She found herself wondering why he had chosen her of all people, when someone of his social standing could have courted any noble woman. Reijou's explanation revealed a practicality that eased her uncertainty. In Galbraith, he said, her work would be valued rather than shunned. His territory bordered the Urzim woods, an untamed expanse teeming with monsters. No matter how many he slew, more always appeared, leaving countless carcasses that became both a burden and a hazard. To Reijou, monsters were simply enemies to be exterminated, but Mel's enthusiasm for transforming their remains into food had offered him a new perspective. He and his knights had occasionally eaten monster meat on expeditions, but never knew how to purge the dangerous magical energy it contained. Mel's method of purification turned something deadly into something nourishing. Her research, Reijou believed, could transform not only Galbraith's economy, but also its people's survival. The thought filled Mel with quiet joy. For the first time, she felt that her work, once dismissed as strange and distasteful, might actually serve a purpose. Roger's confidence in her made her feel seen in a way few ever had. Though moved by his sincerity, Mel doubted her worthiness. She had none of the grace or domestic skill expected of a duchess. Her only strength lay in research and experimentation, pursuits often regarded as unladylike. Yet Roger's acceptance seemed genuine. If he truly valued her for who she was, she resolved to meet him halfway and make herself useful in return. His duties as a monster hunter would provide the very materials she needed, ensuring nothing from his battles would go to waste. Their moment of understanding was soon interrupted by Claude, one of Mel's guards, who came to inform her that her father awaited Roger in the castle. As they walked down the corridor, Claude's protective instincts surfaced. His tone carried a warning against sharing too much about their territory with a man they had known for only 2 days. Roger, noticing the tension, did not take offense. Given his own fearsome reputation as the Blood-Crazed Duke, he found such caution reasonable. Later that evening, Roger met Count Marchalrayd to formalize the engagement. The Count, though anxious in the presence of a duke, was relieved to learn that Roger genuinely admired Mel's work and intended to protect her. Still, as a father, he needed to understand the sincerity behind this sudden proposal. Roger spoke candidly about the moment that changed his perception. During the banquet, he had been disinterested, going through the motions expected of nobility. Even when a beast attacked, he dispatched it without emotion. Yet when he turned and saw Mel, unflinching, unafraid, and unbothered by the blood that covered him, he felt an unexpected sense of recognition. She had looked at him as a monster, but as a man. It was then he realized she might be someone who could truly accept him. The confession reassured the Count. Roger admitted that part of the urgency came from his family's persistent attempts to arrange a marriage for him. Yet his admiration for Mel had become genuine. As he listed the many qualities he valued in her, her diligence, her curiosity, her composure, the Count finally saw the truth in his words. Moved by his sincerity, he agreed to the engagement and signed the contract. Before doing so, however, the Count revealed something Roger had not expected. The rumors about Mel consuming monster meat had been started by him. He had done it deliberately to protect her research from being exploited for destructive purposes. Roger understood the reasoning and assured the Count that the secret would remain buried. Mel, who was unaware of this conversation, was simply told not to worry about matters beyond her concern. 10 days later, Roger returned to Galbraith while Mel began preparing for the move. The task of packing her research was overwhelming, and Roger had sent several of his knights to assist. Although their engagement was official, the reality of it still felt distant. She'd often caught herself glancing at the enchanted marriage contract he had given her, a token imbued with magic symbolizing his commitment. He had asked her to keep it a secret, partly out of embarrassment, fearing his companion Chaos would tease him for such sentimentality. As departure day neared, Mullen, one of her knights, reported that the royal meat was frozen and ready for transport. Mel instructed him to leave the muter hides for her father and stepbrother, who could make fine coats from them. She wondered if it was truly normal for an engaged couple to move in together so soon, but the decision was practical. Winter's arrival would soon render travel between Galbraith and the Marchalrayd territory impossible. If she stayed, Roger would be unable to see her for half a year. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. The head butler, Herman, entered quietly. Having cared for her since childhood, he carried a bittersweet expression as he informed her that her escort had arrived. Mel realized then that she might not return for a very long time and decided to see her father one last time before leaving. When she entered his room, she instead found her stepmother, Cecilia. Though she claimed to have come to bid farewell, her words quickly turned cutting. She questioned how Mel had managed to attract a duke's attention and reminded her that her own son remained the true heir of the Marchalrayd family. Cecilia's final warning, that Mel should not expect to be welcomed back if abandoned, was delivered with cold satisfaction. Rather than engage in argument, Mel left in silence, unwilling to taint her final moments at home with bitterness. Outside, her father greeted her warmly. He noticed the coat she wore and explained that it had once belonged to her late mother, Elise, who had worn it on her wedding day. Mel listened quietly as he recalled Elise's first winter in the north, how she had played joyfully in the snow until illness confined her indoors. The story made Mel smile, offering her a glimpse of the woman she had longed to know. Soon, Roger arrived in the courtyard to escort her. Her belongings were already prepared, and he took note of the stack of old research papers nearby. Concerned that they might fall into the wrong hands, he offered to destroy them. Mel consented, and he set the pile ablaze with a spell so powerful that flames shot high into the air. The sudden display startled everyone present, though Roger's embarrassed expression afterwards softened the moment. His attempt to impress her had clearly gotten out of hand. Before they departed, Roger turned to Claude, thanking him for protecting Mel and praising his potential as a knight. He even extended an invitation to join the Galbraith order, a gesture that left the young man stunned. With everything in order, Roger helped Mel onto his dragon's back. Her father stood below, watching in silence as they prepared to depart. Pride and melancholy mingled in his gaze. He knew his daughter was stepping into a new life, one far beyond his reach, but he also trusted that she would be cherished. As the dragon lifted from the courtyard, its wings scattering snow into the air, Mel looked down at the home she was leaving behind. The world below grew smaller, yet the path ahead felt vast and uncertain. Thus ended one chapter of their lives, the daughter of Marchalrayd departing her home, and the Blood-Crazed Duke finding the one person unafraid of his shadow. Later that night, Roger and the other knights equipped their dragons with glowing lights so they would not lose track of one another during the flight. Mel found the sight mesmerizing, imagining how, from the ground, the dragons must have looked like shooting stars streaking across the night sky. As they passed over the port town, she wondered if they would be spending the night there. Roger explained that his plan was to continue flying until they reached Fort Ridderard. However, if Mel was uncomfortable with the idea of sleeping in a fortress, he could easily arrange for her to stay in the city instead. To his surprise, Mel was thrilled by the thought of spending a night in a fort. Though Roger warned her that the accommodations would be far from comfortable, little more than rock-hard beds and bare walls, Mel didn't mind. What excited her most was the fort's proximity to a river, which would allow her to catch fresh fish monsters during their spawning season. Up until now, her catches had been limited to the monsters that wandered into the Marchalrayd territory, but out here, she had an abundance of new species to study and cook. Roger understood her enthusiasm and mentioned that cyanoses were quite common around this time of year. Mel was eager to try preparing one, and Roger admitted he was looking forward to tasting it himself. However, he reminded her that catching such a fish required setting traps and waiting patiently. Mel's excitement waned at the realization that she wouldn't be able to cook the fish that very night. Seeing her disappointment, Roger reassured her that if they set the traps upon arrival, there was a good chance one would be caught by morning, just in time for breakfast. When Mel looked up to confirm if he was serious, Roger found himself momentarily disarmed by her innocent expression before recovering his composure. He told her that he would much rather have her cooking for breakfast than eat the stale rations stored at the fort, which delighted her. Remembering what Chaos once said, Mel asked if Roger and the knights had truly only known dreadful experiences with monster meat before meeting her. Roger admitted that was true. He and his men had often been forced to eat monster meat during long expeditions when rations ran out, and their attempts at cooking it rarely ended well. Most of the time, he said, they simply threw it over an open flame and hoped for the best. The memory of those meals, particularly the Bolivia's cream wooden gargantus, was enough to make him shudder. A little while later, the group reached the fortress. Roger instructed Mel to hold on tightly to him as they descended. Upon landing, the guards stationed at the fort came to greet them, asking if Roger wanted his usual accommodations. When they learned he had brought a guest, they quickly prepared the western wing for them, though they warned that the place had nothing fancy to offer. As Roger helped Mel unpack, he hesitated, realizing just how crude the fort really was. He offered once again to arrange for her to stay in the city, but Mel declined. She explained that back at her research lab, she often fell asleep on the floor after long nights of works, so the fort was hardly an inconvenience. More importantly, she said that knowing Roger was nearby made her feel safe. Her words flustered Roger, but they also filled him with quiet happiness. He led her to her room and suggested she get some rest, assuming she must be exhausted from the journey. But Mel, still full of energy, said the ride had been comfortable, mostly thanks to Roger keeping her warm during the flight. Just then, she caught the faint scent of something cooking, and it didn't please her. Curious, she followed it to the kitchen, where she found Mullen and Zeph preparing a large pot of porridge for the knights. Mel noted that the portion seemed insufficient for everyone and suggested adding some pre-salted noodle meat she had prepared earlier. The two knights exchanged uncertain glances. Mullen was worried about using their limited supply, while Zeph admitted he was still uneasy about eating monster meat. He hadn't been present the first time the others tried it and wasn't sure it was truly safe. To prove that there was nothing to fear, Mel grilled a few slices of the meat, assuring them that she had already removed the magic toxins. Zeph accepted a piece reluctantly, while Mullen eagerly requested one as well. Mullen took a bite without hesitation and immediately praised Mel's cooking. Zeph, encouraged by his comrade's reaction, tasted his own piece and was surprised by how delicious it was. At that moment, Roger entered the kitchen, his expression stern. He was clearly displeased to see Mel cooking for the other men. Mel tried to assure him that she had made some for him too, but Roger, still sulking, refused to eat. Not wanting to let good food go to waste, Mel remembered how her family's maid used to feed her younger brother when he refused his meals. She decided to do the same to Roger, catching him off guard and slipping the piece of meat into his mouth. Though embarrassed, Roger admitted it tasted incredible, and his mood quickly softened. With everyone convinced, Mel set about adding the diced noodle meat into the porridge, frying it first to bring out its aroma. Later that night, the knights gathered to eat, and the morale throughout the fort lifted as they tasted the hearty dish. Roger commended Mel for transforming such a simple meal into something extraordinary. She humbly explained that she hadn't done anything special, just diced the meat and mixed it in, but Roger remained deeply impressed nonetheless. When he realized that everyone had eaten except Mel, Roger scooped up a spoonful of porridge and offered it to her. Her cheeks reddened as she realized he intended to feed her, much like she had done to him earlier. Embarrassed but flattered, she tried to insist she could eat by herself, but Roger persisted and she eventually allowed him to feed her. Afterward, she told him how delicious it was, though she could barely meet his eyes. When the meal was over, Roger brought up something more personal. He gently asked Mel to stop addressing him so formally. It was true that she still used his title often, despite their engagement. Mel realized it was unnecessary and agreed to start addressing him casually. Hearing her speak his name without formality was a moment Roger quietly cherished. But before he could say more, his eyes suddenly flashed gold and he clutched his head in pain. Ralph called for help, but Roger waved him off, saying he had merely lost control of his magic for a moment. Though the surge left him with a headache, he claimed to be fine. Mel, however, was deeply worried that this might have been caused by the monster meat. Mullen reassured her that it wasn't. Roger's body simply held an extraordinary amount of magic, and when it built up too much, it caused strain. All he needed to do was release some of it. Roger took this as an opportunity to suggest going out the next morning to hunt fish monsters, which would help him expend his excess energy. Mel tried to take comfort in his confidence, but her thoughts turned heavy. Having too much magic stored in the body was dangerous. It could produce toxins that eventually drove a person mad. That was the same fate her mother had suffered. Mel could still remember her mother lying feverish in bed, doing her best to stay strong despite her failing health. Her mother had explained that she was born with immense magical power that often went out of control when not properly released. Mel had been too young to understand, asking if there was any way to help. Her mother only smiled weakly, already too far gone. When she passed away, rumors spread that she had died from eating monster meat. Mel knew that wasn't true. Her mother's experimental spell for extracting magic from monster meat had been incomplete, and during one failed attempt, her body absorbed the monster's magic instead. Determined to clear her mother's name, Mel dedicated her life to perfecting that very spell. Years later, she succeeded in discovering that human bodies, being far weaker than monsters, were more vulnerable to death from magic toxin accumulation, especially with repeated exposure. If she had known that back then, perhaps she could have saved her mother. But it was too late. All she could do now was ensure Roger didn't meet the same end. Sometime later, Mel awoke in bed and realized she didn't remember lying down. The last thing she recalled was pacing anxiously, trying to think of a way to help Roger. She must have fallen asleep on the floor, and Roger had likely found her and carried her to bed. Flustered, she quickly got up to find him. She discovered Roger in the dining hall, sipping tea. When she asked if he was feeling better, he assured her that he was fine. His magic hadn't reached dangerous levels yet, and to prove it, he pressed his forehead against hers, showing her he had no fever. Mel was relieved, though she noticed his skin felt cold. Roger explained that he had gotten soaked while trying to catch the fish monster they discussed. Mel felt guilty for making him go out in the freezing night, but Roger brushed it off with a smile. He then invited her to see the fish he had caught, but before that, Mel insisted on warming him up. Roger pulled her close, saying that staying like this would do the trick. Her face flushed crimson, yet she didn't pull away. Being in his arms felt comforting, and she realized she didn't mind the closeness at all. Mel asked Roger if he had already killed the fish, but he told her it was still alive, swimming in the metal net he had set by the river. Hearing this, Mel's eyes lit up. Dawn was near, and she eagerly suggested they start preparing the Xanas. Roger agreed and offered to join, but Mel objected, feeling guilty that he hadn't slept after spending all night catching it. Roger assured her he was fine, though he joked that if she really wanted to make him feel better, a hug would help. Embarrassed, Mel said she hadn't bathed and was still dirty. Roger laughed, claiming he was surely dirtier. When she turned away in fluster, he hugged her from behind, leaving her completely red-faced, just as Seth walked in. Mel greeted him awkwardly. Later, when the knights awoke, Mel announced her plan to prepare the Xanas for breakfast. She needed flour and oil to fry it, and Seth volunteered to fetch them. As he left, Mel and Roger headed toward the river. Roger asked if she had everything she needed, and she proudly showed him the magic circles she'd drawn on oil paper. Roger was curious how she planned to extract magic outdoors. Mel explained that she'd intended to draw a circle near the river, but the water would have washed it away, so this was her solution. When they arrived, Roger told her to stay back. The Xanas was still dangerous. He ordered the knights to haul up the net, warning them to be careful. Monster fish were powerful, and even one strike could break a bone. As Roger commanded his men, Mel couldn't help but admire how confident and composed he was in moments like this. When the fish surfaced, she gasped. The Xanas was enormous, far larger than she'd imagined. Illustrations didn't do it justice. Its presence was magnificent. She wanted to get closer, but Roger stopped her, reminding her it could easily tear off her arm. Now that the fish was out of the water, Roger asked if she was ready for him to behead it. To his surprise, Mel raised a sword, saying she wanted to do it herself. But the blade was far too heavy, and she soon realized she couldn't manage it. Roger comforted her, telling her not to be discouraged. It took years to master swordsmanship. For now, he handled the difficult part. That said, he admitted he had never killed a fish before and asked if there was a proper method. Mel explained that the first step was to blind it. The knights were puzzled, so she elaborated that fish stopped moving when they couldn't see. She placed a cloth over the Ixana's eyes, and just as she said, it went still. Then she instructed Roger to stab it right behind the eyes and above the gills to destroy its brain. Roger did as told. After a brief struggle, the creature went limp. The Ixana's was dead. Mel began her work, covering the fish with her magic circles and casting the extraction spell. The magical energy inside was dense, but there wasn't much blood, making the process clean and efficient. When it was done, she sealed the extracted magic in a flask and handed it to Roger. She then hesitated to ask him to behead the fish again, feeling guilty for always relying on him. Instead, she asked if he could teach her how to do it. Roger chuckled and told her he didn't mind doing it himself. It made him happy to help with her cooking. Mel smiled, touched by his words, and admitted she enjoyed having him around. Back home, she'd always cooked and studied alone. Her father was busy, and others found her strange. Working with Roger and his knights felt different, warm, and fulfilling. Once the knights repositioned the fish, Roger prepared to strike. Before he did, he asked if there was anything to keep in mind. Mel explained the ideal cut, start where he'd stab and slice diagonally toward the gills. It was a tricky angle, but Roger, ever precise, executed it flawlessly. Mel and the knights were equally amazed by his mastery. Returning to the fortress, they found Seth had finished setting up everything needed to cook. He apologized that they'd have to work outside. The kitchen was too small for such a massive catch. Mel didn't mind. Cleaning would be easier this way. First, they needed to skin and scale the fish. A knight named Ambry volunteered, skillfully slicing the skin off without wasting any meat. With the fish ready, Mel set up 2 pots of oil, one cooler, one hotter. She planned to fry the meat twice for the perfect texture. Roger, fascinated, offered to help. Mel hadn't expected his enthusiasm, but was glad for it. She asked him to monitor the hot oil while she mixed the batter. Lacking eggs, she made a simple blend of flour, water, and spices. Once ready, she dipped the fish pieces in and fried them in the cooler pot until golden brown, then transferred them to the hotter oil to crisp the outside. When the first batch was done, she served Roger a plate while the knights began cooking more. Curious, Roger decided to try making a batch himself, but he left it in too long, burning the pieces. Mel reassured him that it wasn't bad. Few people got it right on the first try. To show it truly didn't matter, she asked him to feed her one. Roger hesitated, embarrassed, but she insisted. She wanted to taste the one he cooked, and her hands were still sticky from prep. He blew gently to cool it and fed her a piece. Mel smiled at the chewy texture, and Roger tried one himself, finding it oddly satisfying. Then they tasted the softer version. Mel loved how fluffy it was, unable to decide which she preferred. Roger suggested serving both, predicting the knights would have different tastes. He was right. Many favored Roger's dry version, noting it could even be stored as rations. Mel thanked him for the clever idea, though he brushed it off as an accident. As cooking continued, Roger noticed Mel had been standing all morning. He asked if she was tired, but she said she was too happy cooking with him to feel it. Still, he grew concerned when he saw knights carrying dishes into the fortress. Mel explained that she'd asked the chefs to prepare bread and vegetables, so the tables were set up inside. She told him to go ahead. No one would start eating until their commander joined. Roger hesitated but was eventually pulled away by Mullen. Once he was gone, Mel began cleaning up, quenching the firewood. She felt a bit guilty for having Roger do so much already and wanted to handle the rest herself. Just then, Seth and Ambry arrived to help. Grateful, she accepted and offered them a taste of something new. From a bowl, she revealed pieces of belly meat that looked different from the others. It wasn't suitable for frying, but she wanted their opinion. Both men took a bite and were delighted. Ambry said it would taste even better with sour fruit juice. Seth mentioned that some fruits had been prepared for breakfast and suggested grabbing some juice. Mel was thrilled by the idea and urged them to hurry before it was gone. When they reached the hall, the knights were already eating. Roger spotted Mel and called her to sit beside him. A moment later, Seth returned with a fruit called dabo, known for its sourness. Mel poured its juice over her fish and was amazed by how well it balanced the flavor. Seeing her joy, Roger grew curious and tried some himself, only for his face to twist in shock from the intense sourness. Trying not to offend her, he forced a smile, but Mel noticed and quietly decided to avoid sour flavors when cooking for him in the future. After breakfast, it was time to depart for Galbraith Castle. Roger ordered everyone to mount their dragons, and the group took off together, soaring through the morning sky. As their journey went on, Mel's curiosity about Roger's life in Galbreth only deepened. Every knight they encountered seemed to genuinely admire him, but she wondered how the ordinary citizens viewed their duke. During their travels, she asked Roger about the towns and cities within his domain. He explained that Galbraith had once consisted of 30 cities, but after the Great Famine 17 years earlier, only 12 remained. Mel was shocked when he added that the previous duke had died during that same period. She had never heard of a noble losing their life because of a famine. Roger clarified the truth behind the event. At that time, an abnormal number of monsters had suddenly appeared in the forest of Rosinia. Before the knights could properly thin out their numbers, the magical density in the region surged so intensely that hordes of blood-mad magic beasts poured into Galbreth. Mel was stunned. She had never known that such a disaster occurred. Roger wasn't surprised by her ignorance. He explained that the Duke back then had handled the crisis so effectively that the catastrophe never spread beyond Galbraith. The cost, however, had been devastating. Many knights died protecting the region, their sacrifices ensuring the rest of the kingdom would remain safe. Mel asked why neighboring kingdoms had not sent assistance. Roger replied that although the king at the time likely wished to help, the entire nation was suffering from the same famine and lacked any real resources to spare. Furthermore, the Knights of Galbraith had long upheld the oath of defending the kingdom with their very lives, considering death in the line of duty to be their greatest honor. Roger and the knights under him followed that same belief. If another crisis struck, he regarded it as his responsibility to risk his life to protect the kingdom. Mel didn't know how to respond. Roger spoke about the possibility of dying with such acceptance, almost peacefully, and his gentle smile as he did so reminded her of her mother in her final moments. The resemblance made her heart ache. The thought of Roger treating his life as disposable terrified her. Her emotions spilled over and she begged him to never speak about sacrificing his life so casually again. She knew she had no authority to scold him, but she couldn't bear the idea of him embracing the same hopeless resignation that had taken her mother from her. More than anything, she wanted to prevent another tragedy, even if she had to devote the rest of her life to her research. Recognizing her distress, Roger immediately apologized, admitting that his words must have sounded as if he did not value his own life. But Mel's frustration stemmed from more than that. Whether they intended it or not, their lives were now intertwined. She wanted to carry part of the weight he bore. She took his hand and, although she was no knight and couldn't swear an oath like one, she vowed to do everything within her power to ensure no misfortune ever reached him for as long as they lived. Roger, moved by her sincerity, found himself momentarily speechless. He knew how deeply she cared, but he still couldn't bring himself to rely too heavily on her. Putting her in danger was the last thing he ever wanted. Mel, however, had no intention of charging into battles like a knight. She reminded him that her abilities lay in her research and knowledge, and those skills could protect them in ways he had never considered. All she wanted was for him to lean on her, even if only a little. When Roger noticed the tears forming in her eyes, he gently pulled her into his arms. He didn't need words to tell her not to cry. Though he understood her fears, death had always been part of the path he walked. That was simply what it meant to be a knight. He then asked if she wanted to hear about his past, and Mel eagerly agreed, hoping to understand him better. Roger began by explaining that he was born the second son of the previous king. He had always shared a close relationship with his older brother, Maxim, though the way they were treated differed greatly. Maxim, with his golden hair and purple eyes resembling the legendary King Maxim of old, also known as the Great Sage, was celebrated as the second coming of that historic ruler. Roger, on the other hand, shocked the kingdom when his unusual sight manifested, granting him the ability to store magic inside his eyes. As a child, he had often lost control over his power, unintentionally blowing apart parts of the castle and earning the reputation of the out-of-control prince. Even after learning to control his magic, many people continued to fear him. The only ones who didn't avoid him were the knights. One day, Chaos had been assigned to guard him. Though Chaos constantly criticized him, he eventually became the very first knight to swear loyalty to him. Over time, they developed a deep friendship. Chaos could have followed in his father's footsteps and joined the royal guards, but instead chose to remain by Roger's side, even accompanying him to Galbraith once Roger became duke. Around that same period, the kingdom was suffering heavily from drought and famine. Tensions among nobles were rising and rebellion seemed imminent. Some nobles argued that Roger should become king instead of Maxim, hoping to leverage his power to seize resources from neighboring nations. This led to conflicts between the pro-war and anti-war factions. During the chaos, Chaos' father was killed. As the unrest worsened and rumors began circulating about monsters overwhelming Galbreth, Roger realized he could not stand by any longer. He went to Maxim and offered to give up his claim to the throne in exchange for being allowed to take responsibility for the troubled region. He wanted Maxim to focus on stabilizing the kingdom without interference. Maxim was reluctant to let Roger shoulder such a burden at a young age, but they both understood it was the only viable solution. With the king's approval, the ruler abdicated, Maxim ascended to the throne, and Roger was granted the title of Duke of Galbraith. Several years later, once both brothers had adjusted to their new roles, Roger requested a meeting with Maxim to propose a series of reforms. The Knights of Galbreth constantly risked their lives, yet they received few tangible rewards. Roger believed this needed to change. Maxim agreed and suggested granting any knight who served 5 years in Galbreth an automatic promotion to the Royal Guard. Roger approved, confident the incentive would greatly boost morale. Roger then proposed another policy. The castle should buy the valuable materials obtained from slain monsters, horns, hides, claws, and similar items, instead of letting them go to waste. Maxim supported this idea as well, stating he would pay generously as long as the materials were in good condition. These reforms, combined with Roger's position as the king's younger brother, dramatically improved Galbraith's situation. Mel couldn't help but find Roger's accomplishments remarkable. Roger, however, believed his actions only further proved that he must be ready to sacrifice himself for the region. Mel immediately rejected that mindset. Instead of accepting death as inevitable, he should focus on preventing disasters altogether. Roger doubted such prevention was even possible, but Mel explained that her research focused on extracting magical toxins from living organisms. If she could one day apply that technique on a large scale, she might be able to stop monsters from going mad in the first place. And if there were no mad beasts, Roger wouldn't need to throw himself into danger so often. Roger was stunned. He had never thought of the problem from that angle. Mel continued, adding that if she perfected toxin extraction from living monsters, she might also be able to reverse the madness and make their meat safe to consume. Her effortless shift from scientific theory to cooking possibilities made Roger smile. Only Mel could turn a discussion about national disasters into a culinary idea, and that trait was one of the many reasons he loved her. Leaning in, Roger gently kissed her forehead. Mel, completely unprepared, nearly collapsed from embarrassment. Roger adored how flustered she became. Although she assumed he was simply teasing her, he meant every affectionate gesture sincerely. Soon after, Roger looked toward the landscape beneath them and realized they were entering Galbreth territory. The massive expanse below was the Ozenu Forest. He wanted to land and show Mel around, but the forest was far too vast and complex to navigate without a proper map. Mel remembered hearing that the forest was teeming with monsters, which Roger confirmed. He explained that the soil was so rich in magical ore that only magical creatures could survive there. Before she could ask more, Roger's expression sharpened. He sensed danger and asked Mel to move off his lap. She obeyed instantly. Moments later, Mullen delivered a report. A flock of Burgun was approaching from behind. Roger stayed composed and ordered the knights into formation to evade the incoming threat. Hearing they were being pursued, Mel glanced back and froze at the sight of the monstrous creatures gaining on them. Mullen reported that the Burgun were accelerating. Roger instructed the group to prepare to speed up, handed Mel a pair of wind goggles, and apologized that her first visit to Galbraith was already turning violent. Mel swallowed her fear, telling herself this was probably normal for the region. Even so, Roger found it concerning. It was unusual for Burgun to attack despite the presence of a full knight escort. Something about the situation felt off. Still, escaping came first. Roger told Mel to hold on tightly, then cast acceleration magic. The other knights followed suit, and Mel was overwhelmed by the sudden burst of speed. Then she noticed something alarming. The ground was getting closer. Roger pulled up at the last second, narrowly avoiding a direct collision with the swooping bird monsters. The sudden jolt rattled Mel hard enough that she almost screamed. Her fear spiked so sharply that her mind grabbed onto the one thing it could: food. For a brief moment, she distracted herself by imagining how delicious the birds might be if she roasted them. But that comforting thought immediately flipped into horror when she realized the birds were probably thinking the same thing about her. The flock still followed relentlessly, and Roger, who would normally peel back to thin out their numbers, couldn't risk leaving her exposed. He ordered the other knights to engage the monsters directly, breaking their formation, then warned Mel to brace herself. He was going to accelerate. Mel insisted she would be fine, but Roger didn't take chances. He cast a stronger acceleration spell, and the sudden burst of speed was so intense Mel's goggles barely kept her eyes open against the roaring wind. The dragon strained under the force, and Mel could feel her stomach twist from the velocity. Meanwhile, the other knights were having their own problems. Mullen's aim, already mediocre under normal conditions, became nearly useless at this distance. He and Seth couldn't understand why the birds were chasing them so aggressively today. They contacted Roger with a proposal to land at a nearby fort and take an offensive stance, but Roger shut that idea down immediately. Landing meant slowing, and slowing meant giving the monsters an opening. Instead, he ordered them to maintain course until they reached the defensive line of Galbreth territory. Mel quickly understood why he was being so stubborn. He didn't want any risk falling on her. Worse, the dragons were clearly weighed down by all the supplies she had brought along: ingredients, tools, notebooks, everything she treasured. She began feeling like a burden. Then she remembered something important. She had rigged her bags to explode if someone attempted to force them open. The mechanism wasn't meant as a weapon, but she suggested they could use her baggage as a makeshift distraction. Roger immediately rejected the idea. He knew how important her belongings were and refused to let her sacrifice them. Mel then offered a more drastic alternative. He could drop her off on the ground so he could fight freely without worrying about her safety. Roger refused even more firmly. Leaving her behind was too dangerous. He promised the soldiers waiting at the defensive line would protect them once they arrived. Mel tried to accept his reassurance, though she still wished she had some way to help. She knew no attack magic and mid-air paper magic circles were almost useless. That was when she remembered the flask she still had, St. As of Blood, a potent magical extract. Roger had once mentioned that a single flask contained enough raw mana to create something equivalent to a weapon of mass destruction. Mel considered throwing it, but she realized that alone wouldn't take out the entire flock. So she began rapidly scribbling as many ancient magic circles as she could remember around the flask, layering them for increased destructive potential: explosion, eruption, fire, gust, blaze. By the time she finished, the flask had transformed into something far more terrifying than she intended. She handed the flask to Roger and told him to activate it with his blood. His magic was the strongest, meaning the spell would reach its full potential only through him. Roger inspected the flask and stared in disbelief at the sheer number of spells she had crammed onto it. He muttered that he was holding a pocket nuke and actually found the absurdity of the situation hilarious. With a quick slice across his palm, he let his blood drip onto the flask, watching the runes ignite with unstable energy. As he worked, Roger asked when she thought all this up. Mel admitted she'd invented it moments ago. Her concern immediately shifted to his cut, insisting she treat it once they reached safety. He agreed easily, but escaping came first. Roger issued new orders. All knights were to gather as much acceleration magic as possible and prepare to bolt at maximum speed once he gave the signal. However, he singled out Mullen and instructed him to stay put. When Roger reached the rear position, he told Mullen that he needed him to act as bait, flying straight into the flock to break their formation. Mullen froze, initially thinking Roger was ordering him to die. Roger clarified he wasn't sacrificing anyone. He simply needed the monster's attention diverted long enough for him to deploy Mel's bomb. He ended by ordering Mullen to return alive. Once Roger gave the command, the knights ascended sharply while Mullen hurled himself straight into the flock. Chaos erupted among the birds as their formation collapsed. Roger waited until Mullen escaped beyond the blast radius, then hurled the flask toward one of the monsters. The creature swallowed it immediately, thinking it food, but that wouldn't stop what came next. Roger told Mel to brace herself. A moment later, a massive eruption of magical energy tore the sky open, releasing overwhelming pressure. The energy condensed almost instantly into a gigantic flaming sphere, an explosion so intense the shockwave tore through the entire flock, eliminating the monsters in an instant. Mel stared wordlessly. She had known the attack would be strong, but she had never anticipated something so catastrophic. The knights agreed the blast was overkill, but effective. Mullen even emerged unscathed, though shaken. Mel felt a twinge of regret at the loss of so much perfectly good monster meat, but far more than that, she felt horrified by the realization of what she had created. She had always been so focused on extracting flavors and perfecting her culinary research that she had never considered how destructive pure magic extract could be. Roger hadn't been exaggerating when he said it could destroy nations. She asked if her research was too dangerous. Roger saw her genuine worry and gently reassured her. He said he'd never allow anyone to rebuke her for her work. Besides, extracted magic had uses beyond destructive power. It could be converted into fuel, safer, cleaner, and more stable than wood. In fact, he suggested they begin testing it in the Galbreth region immediately. It could provide heat and light during harsh winters and benefit countless families. That thought made Mel feel lighter. Back home, no one had cared about her research, so she had never considered its potential impact on society. Roger, however, not only believed in her, he was actively paving a path for her. She felt deeply grateful. Roger then added that he was the one who should be grateful. Without her quick thinking, they would have been overwhelmed by the monsters. Mel insisted the credit belonged mostly to him. Spell activation depended on magical power, and only Roger could use such hastily drawn runes effectively. Roger simply stated it had been a team effort. Since they worked so well together, he casually suggested they should go monster hunting someday. Mel lit up instantly and asked if he was serious. When Roger assured her he wasn't joking, she nearly burst with excitement. At that moment, Chaos arrived at breakneck speed, alarmed after detecting the explosion. Roger informed him he was late. They had already dealt with everything. Chaos was relieved, then immediately furious, yelling at Roger for using such a destructive spell so recklessly. Mel shyly raised her hand, ready to admit she had been the one who created it. But before she could speak, more soldiers arrived. Excited to meet Roger's bride, they surrounded her, complimenting her appearance. Mel froze, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness she wasn't used to. Eventually, they reached the heart of Galbraith's Milady territory, where Roger's fortress-like castle stood at the center. Mel noted the structure looked more like a fortified stronghold than a noble residence. Roger explained that it originally had been a defensive fortress against monster attacks, and even after the city grew around it, some people still called it the Fortress City. Mel noticed scorch marks along the base of the walls and assumed they were remnants of past battles Roger had fought. He insisted things weren't as bad as they looked. They prepared to enter the city. Roger instructed Mullen to alert the guards to open the main gate and order Chaos to retrieve Mel's baggage later. Then he guided Mel through the entrance tunnel. Roger explained that a magic barrier currently protected the city from aerial threats. Maintaining it consumed too much mana to keep active constantly, but they likely activated it after hearing about the monster attack. Mel worried whether more monsters might come. Roger said the only logical thing was to stay alert. And with that, he welcomed her to his city. After landing, Roger asked Mel to check her luggage to make sure nothing had fallen out during the chaotic flight. While going through her belongings, she felt the prickling sensation of being watched. When she cautiously looked up, she realized Roger's dragon had its eyes fixed directly on her, unblinking and intensely focused. The sight made her tense. She had no idea why a massive creature like that would stare at her so intently. But when she followed the line of its gaze, she discovered the truth. The dragon wasn't staring at her at all. It was staring at the leftover royal noodle meat Roger held in his hand. Realizing this, Mel felt a little sorry for the beast. She approached Roger and asked if he would let the dragon have some of the meat. Roger immediately understood what she was trying to do, but he hesitated. He had been saving the rest of the noodle for himself, hoping to enjoy it later. Even so, the longing in the dragon's eyes was hard to ignore. With a reluctant sigh, he gave in and handed the meat over. The dragon happily devoured it, and Roger officially welcomed Mel to his castle. As they crossed the bridge leading inside, Mel noticed movement in the moat below. Leaning over to look more closely, she spotted dozens of fish swimming lazily beneath the water. They were called Bacta monster fish, kept in the moat to help clean waste that occasionally drifted in. Their role was practical, similar to the Xanas she had dealt with before, and as she observed them, she found herself wondering whether Bacta would taste just as delicious if she cooked them. But her curiosity vanished the moment she saw her reflection in the water. Her hair, normally fluffy and soft, had blown into a frizzy, tangled mess during the exhausting chase earlier. Panic hit her immediately. She couldn't meet anyone like this, not as the Duke's future wife, not while she was supposed to make her first impression. She needed to fix it quickly. Nervously, she called out to Roger and told him she had a question. Roger turned back, ready to listen, and Mel noticed he didn't seem bothered by her messy hair at all. For a moment, she wondered if she was overreacting, but she quickly dismissed the thought. A duchess needed to be presentable. Appearance mattered. Roger waited patiently for her to explain, but before she could, he noticed where she was crouching and assumed she was interested in the Bacta. He explained that Bacta tasted delicious when stewed. Mel momentarily forgot her hair problem and admitted she had never tried Bacta before. Roger offered to prepare some for her to taste, and Mel happily agreed before realizing she had wandered completely off topic. She collected herself and explained her real concern. She needed somewhere private to tidy herself up before being introduced to everyone. Upon hearing this, Roger immediately realized he had overlooked something important. He apologized, admitting that the castle had no real chambermaids. Since they had not had a duchess in a long time, he had never thought to hire any in advance. To resolve the problem quickly, he called for Mullen and urgently told him to summon the Blanche Corps. It was the only suitable group he could provide a team of disciplined female knights. Once assembled, Roger instructed them to treat Mel with utmost respect. The knights agreed in unison. Their captain, Blanche, stepped forward to introduce herself, and Mel was momentarily stunned by how strikingly beautiful she was. Following behind her were the vice-captain, Natalie, and the youngest knight, Lillian. Roger informed the knights that Mel had just experienced her very first flight and asked them to help her recover. Mel then asked how long she had before the introduction. Roger hadn't set a specific time yet, but suggested dinner would be appropriate, giving her a few hours to prepare. Before parting, he removed a glove, gently took Mel's hand, and kissed it. The gesture made Mel's cheeks flare red, especially with the knights watching. Roger insisted it wasn't a big deal, they were engaged, after all, and pointed out which room was his if she needed anything. When Roger left, Natalie ushered Mel toward her new room. Mel paused at the doorway, entranced by how beautiful it was, but also hesitant. Her shoes were dirty from the journey, and she worried about staining the pristine carpet. Blanche immediately understood. Without hesitation, she lifted Mel into her arms and carried her directly to a chair. Being held so casually by Blanche left Mel slightly flustered, unsure how to feel about being handled so effortlessly. Blanche then knelt before her and asked to see her feet so she could begin massaging them. Embarrassed, Mel insisted she could manage her own feet and began taking off her boots. Natalie and Lillian approached, offering to bring her sweets if she had any preferences. Mel appreciated their kindness but declined, not wanting to take up more of their time. Blanche, however, refused to accept that. Roger had entrusted them with Mel's care, and to the Blanche Corps, that responsibility was sacred. She drew her sword and presented it to Mel as a sign of loyalty. As she unsheathed the blade, Mel recognized the insignia on it, the same emblem she had seen on Roger's sword the day he saved her. She gently touched the weapon and told the knights that simply being chosen by Roger made them worthy of her trust, but trust needed time to grow. They knew nothing about her, and she still knew very little about them. Returning the blade, she reminded Blanche that a sword represented a knight's life, and offering it to someone she had just met was too much. Mel admitted that rumors about her probably made their job harder, but she had promised Roger that she would prove herself useful to this region. Until she earned her title as Duchess, she wanted Blanche to keep her sword. Blanche understood and promised she would strive to become a knight worthy of serving Mel. Mel thanked her, and as Blanche sheathed her sword again, Mel asked whether the weapon had been crafted by the same smith who made Roger's blade. Blanche explained that all knight swords came from a blacksmith in Midlake. Curious, Mel asked if she could meet the smith someday. Blanche seemed reluctant but agreed to at least mention the request, unable to deny Mel when she asked so earnestly. A moment later, Blanche offered to help brush Mel's hair. But as soon as she started, she realized the volume was far greater than expected. She apologized, admitting the tangles might be too much for her to handle alone. Mel pleaded with her to keep trying because she needed her hair restored to its usual fluffiness. Roger had mentioned he liked it. Blanche was surprised to learn Roger favored fluffy hair, but if that was the case, she declared it her mission to restore Mel's hair before dinner. She gathered all the hair care tools she had and began working carefully. While Blanche brushed, Mel apologized for taking her away from her normal duties. But Blanche said it wasn't an inconvenience. She used to brush her daughter's hair all the time. Mel was stunned to learn Blanche had children, a daughter and a son. Her daughter wanted to become a knight like her, though the idea worried Blanche's husband. Blanche supported her daughter's ambition, but acknowledged how difficult life as a knight could be. She then asked why Mel wanted a sword. Mel answered simply, she needed one to butcher monsters properly. The response caught Blanche off guard. To clarify, she asked if Mel intended to butcher monsters for food. Mel confirmed it without hesitation. After all, monster meat was the very reason she and Roger had met in the first place. Mel called to Natalie and asked her to fetch her work tools. Natalie pulled out a bag filled with knives, so worn down from constant use that they had shrunk to half their original width. Mel explained that she used them to cut through bone and flesh, so their condition was normal. Lillian then asked if Mel really ate monster meat regularly, but Natalie quickly tried to silence her, thinking the question rude. Mel didn't mind at all. She explained how she started researching ways to make monster meat edible, and Lillian found it fascinating. Lillian admitted she had always wanted to try monster meat herself, but no one ever let her because they believed terrible things would happen. She asked if Mel would cook some for her. Mel said she could prepare leftover Xanas as long as Roger approved. Lillian was thrilled, but Blanche scolded her for making inappropriate requests to a noblewoman and dismissed her for the day. Before Lillian left, Mel stopped her to ask her age. Lillian said she was 15, not quite the official adult age of 17, though being knighted already made her a proper adult in the eyes of their order. Mel invited her to try monster food together someday, insisting she would gladly prepare it. Natalie and Blanche protested, but Mel extended the offer to them as well. If anyone had ideas for monsters they wanted to try, she would listen. Unsure how to respond, Natalie and Blanche remained quiet. Lillian raised her hand and suggested the fruit of the screaming wood monster, a rich, sweet, juicy delicacy. Mullen once claimed was the best thing he'd ever eaten, though it had left him with a terrible fever afterward. She had always wanted to try it, but had been too afraid. Mel was intrigued. She had never considered trying monster plants before. But if it was delicious, she wanted to experience it herself. Her enthusiasm spread to the knights, drawing them into her excitement. And with Mel's hair finally beginning to regain its fluff, and the knights warming to her, her new life in Galbreth quietly began. Meanwhile, somewhere in the castle, Mullen was very tense, which prompted Rogier to ask what was wrong. Mullen inquired if Rogier's room and Melfi's room were connected by an internal door. Rogier assured him that everything was fine, completely normal, and safe. However, Rogier then asked Mullen if he had seen the bird leading the berserk flock. Mullen recalled the fierce duel, suggesting the dragons might have been rabid. Rogier pondered this, concluding that the largest monster bird among them had fearlessly swallowed a vial containing immense magical power. The magical toxins must have driven it mad, causing it to go berserk while leading the flock. Mullen calmed Reijou, expressing gratitude that they were protected and no one died. He mentioned that Melfi created the magic circle, acknowledging her as a kind-hearted girl. He noted that her high ability to create weapons was internationally forbidden, but insisted that if she hadn't acted, they would all be dead. Reijou stated that to protect Melfi, he would need to utilize the help of those he trusted, people like Mullen. Reijou then approached Mullen unusually closely, making Mullen nervous. Mullen asked why Reijou was staring at him, and Reijou replied that he wanted to discuss the terrifying spell they had just talked about. At that moment, Chaos entered. Reijou, mistaking him for an assassin, quickly drew his sword and lunged. Chaos stopped him, stating he also wanted to hear about the spell, and then struck Reijou on the head for drawing his sword so quickly. Chaos reprimanded Reijou for rushing Melfi to Shield's room. Reijou apologized, explaining that he had hastily gathered chambermaids who served noble ladies, foolishly assuming Chaos wouldn't leave her alone and would want to guard her with these maids. Chaos mockingly asked if Reijou loved her that much. Reijou confirmed his love and his desire to marry her immediately. After the maids left, an angry Reijou turned to Chaos and yelled, asking how he dared to make his own mother work as a chambermaid. Chaos replied that there was no one else he trusted more, explaining that his mother had experience from taking care of Reijou when he was a child, making her perfect for looking after Melfi. He also clarified that Lady was an amazing woman who got married and took over the family bakery business after her brother became a knight, leaving no one else to succeed the shop. He added that Lady Jordan was the wife of a knight from Galbreth, and this was only a temporary assignment until he could choose new chambermaids. Reijou, though not objecting to Chaos's choices, privately thought that Chaos was always terribly calculating. Chaos then used his power to create a barrier, enclosing only him, Mullen, and Reijou. He demanded they tell him everything they knew about the spell, knowing Reijou had unlimited magical power. He yelled at Reijou, asking if he had merged with the Ozin forest due to his love for it, calling him names like Walking Volcano or Magic Generator. Reijou was saddened and did not answer. Chaos asked if Reijou thought anyone else had noticed, then asked Mullen for his opinion. Mullen hesitated, saying he didn't understand exactly what Chaos meant. Chaos interrupted them and revealed that the spell Reijou used to blow the burgeoning flock to shreds was created by Melfi. Mullen was shocked. Reijou explained that Melfi was desperate to save him, which is why she used the magical power of the Xanas, the same Xanas they had for breakfast, as Mullen realized. Reijou continued that Melfi wrote every spell that came to her mind on that vial full of magical power and gave it to him. He had simply activated it. Mullen was stunned by Melfi's genius. Reijou explained that most contemporary spells are streamlined and simplified incantations. In contrast, ancient spells were wisdom granted to people by spirits in ancient times, abandoned magic that few study anymore. He emphasized that Melfi self-taught this abandoned magic and was able to draw that productive magic circle, proving she was truly a genius. Reijou then asked Chaos to take good care of Melfi's research materials. Chaos confirmed he had already done so, even putting extra seals on the vial containing the royal model's magic power. Reijou was reassured, believing this would suffice for now given its many peaceful uses. He then asked Mullen not to tell anyone what he had heard until the situation was resolved. Mullen agreed and asked why Reijou was telling him this. Reijou replied that he wanted Mullen to protect Melfi with Blanche's company and resume his duties as a dragon knight, protecting her if necessary. Mullen asked if Melfi would be safe in Milady. Reijou replied that there were many people in the area, so he had prepared an isolated room he used to turn it into a research lab for Melfi. He stressed that nothing must happen to her and that Melfi's research must not be stopped, especially if it allowed them to safely eat the monsters, as Galbreth would change for the better. After the meeting, Reijou sat alone, contemplating that he must also discuss this with Melfi. He worried that she was a kind person who might not understand that there were people ready to use her research for evil, but resolved to protect her no matter the cost. Suddenly, Chaos drew his sword, demanding to talk. Reijou was shocked. Holding the sword, Chaos sternly accused Reijou of eating without him, expressing his anger that they ate the delicious Xanas that Melfi prepared, which he loved very much. A guard then arrived and asked them for something. Next, Reijou was seen talking to Melfi. He apologized for the situation, explaining that the men they left behind had reported that some monster had gone berserk and he was forced to launch a raid to take them down. Melfi acknowledged her duties as the Duchess were to appreciate and reassure the Duke, but asked if it was such an emergency. Reijou then asked Melfi to prepare some food for him when he returned. Melfi realized that by confirming he wanted monster meat in front of Blanche's company and the other knights, the Duke was emphasizing that he wanted them to wholeheartedly accept her research. Rogier then asked if there was any monster she was interested in, offering to hunt one while he was out. Embarrassed, Melfi felt it would be rude to ask for something big when he was on his way to kill a rabid burgeoning, but since he offered, she asked for a scrimwood fruit. Everyone was astonished by her request. Melfi explained that it was something she had eaten and regretted due to its strong smell, though Mullen had seemed to think it was sweeter than nectar. Mullen confirmed the sweetness, saying it was overripe and black, fragrant and sweet, filling his mouth with overwhelming joy, though he ate so much that the taste lingered even after rinsing. Melfi privately wondered how two people could have such different experiences eating the same fruit. She told Rogier that her request was not a priority and his safe return was. Prince Rogier promised to bring some with him if he found it. He then asked everyone to depart so they could return before sunset. He embraced Melfi, telling her he had requested that her research materials be moved to a room he used to use, and asked Blanche to guide her there. The next morning, Melfi was very worried about her beloved Prince Rogier. The violent attack by a fully rabid flock of flying monsters upset her, as all she could do was wait and not offer help as she had the day before. Blanche reassured her, saying he would return soon and instructed her to eat breakfast to be ready to welcome His Highness with a bright smile. Blanche then showed her the room the Duke had told her to show Melfi. It would be her new research lab. Melfi was very happy when she saw the library and entered, finding many interesting books. However, she was still upset that her beloved had not returned. She sat in the chair, thinking about Prince Rogier, then brushed her hair and ate breakfast. 3 days later, she was reading a book, terribly upset and missing Prince Rogier because he had not returned. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "The Duke is back." Overjoyed, Melfi quickly ran to him, hugged him, and cried tears of joy. Rogier apologized for the delay. He told her he had brought her a gift, something very exciting he found in the forest, and also had the scrimwood fruit, which he would bring to her room immediately. However, he needed a nap, as he was exhausted. He was so tired that he immediately fell asleep on her and collapsed to the floor, still hugging her tightly. Afterward, the fruit the Duke brought her was seen. Everyone held their hands over their noses because it emitted a very foul odor. Melfi then took out her magical vial and successfully managed to extract the magical energy from the fruit, which was a huge effort. Everyone applauded, very happy with this achievement. Once the magical energy was extracted, the fruit's fragrance became beautiful, and its appearance completely changed. Now, everyone wants to eat it.